Hello students, in my last video I told you about asexual reproduction, means where a single parent is involved in the formation of new organisms or offsprings. There are different types of asexual reproduction like fission, budding, fragmentation, regeneration and spore formation, and also vegetative propagation which takes place only in the plants. Now, sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction where two organisms are involved in the formation of new organisms or in the formation of offsprings, what we call. One is a male, another is a female. Male organism produces male gametes and female organism produces female gametes. Male gametes and female gametes. These are the germ cells which fuse together, both the gametes fuse together to form a zygote, and that zygote changes into an embryo. Embryo further develops into a new organism, right? So sexual reproduction takes place in both plants as well as animals. In the plants, the reproductive part is called as a flower. The reproductive part of a plant is the flower. Flower is a reproductive part, right? Those who produce flowers produce seeds. Not all flowers produce seeds. Like for example, rose does not produce seeds. So rose plant can be grown only by asexual method, that is by using the stem cutting of a rose plant. But there are plants which produce flowers and produce seeds also. Flowers then produce seeds also, fruits and seeds. So these are called seed bearing plants. We call them as seed bearing plants. Right? Now when we say a flower is the reproductive part, what are the parts of a flower? Which parts produce male gametes and which parts produce the female gametes? This is a typical flower. I have drawn here a hibiscus flower. This is a typical flower, hibiscus flower. See, there are two types of flowers. One is unisexual and second bisexual. Means what? There are flowers which are having only the male reproductive parts and the flowers which are having only the female reproductive parts, or the flowers which are having both the male as well as the female reproductive parts. So then what are the reproductive parts of a flower? Let us see. Now this is a typical flower. See, there are four parts of a flower. One is called as the sepals. Which are green leaf-like structures. These are green leaf-like structures that you see at the base of a flower. At the base of the flower, there are small, tiny leaf-like structures. They are called as sepals. What is the function of sepals? Sepals protect the flower when it is in the bud condition. First a bud is formed, flower bud, and that bud later opens into a flower. It blooms into a flower. So during the bud condition, these sepals, that is the green leaf-like structures at the base of the flower, they protect the flower bud. Then, second, these are the petals. Petals means what? the colored parts of the flower. Colored parts of the flower. See, different flowers have different colors. Beautiful colors are there. When you go to a park or a garden, you see flowers of different colors, different shapes. Different shapes of petals, different shapes of sepals and all that, right? The beautiful part of the flower are the petals. They are differently colored. What is the function of these petals? To attract the insects for an important function, important activity called as pollination. Pollination is done by the insects, and to attract the insects for pollination, these petals are beautifully colored. We see different colored hibiscus. A red color we have nowadays, we have white or we have violet colors, right? Different colored hibiscus are there now. Alright, the beautifully colored part of the flower we call as the petal. Then comes the reproductive parts. These are the reproductive parts. One is a stamen and another is a pistil. Stamens are called as the male reproductive parts. Stamens are the male reproductive parts, whereas pistils are the female reproductive parts. Stamens are the male reproductive parts, whereas female reproductive parts are called pistils or carpels. A stamen consists of two parts, that is a filament and an anther. This swollen part is called as the anther, whereas this part is called as the filament. This swollen part is called as the anther, and the long this quarter which joins the style, the long part, which tubular part, is called as the filament. Now this anther contains pollen sacs. Anther contains the pollen sacs, which in turn produce pollen grains. So the pollen grains are formed inside the anthers. These pollen grains are the male gametes. These pollen grains are the male gametes, right? Now here in a hibiscus flower, you can see all these stamens containing the anthers. Anthers contain pollen grains, which are the male gametes. Okay. Then the female reproductive part is called as the pistil or the carpel. Each pistil is made up of three parts. One is the stigma, second one is the style, and third one is the ovary. Stigma, style, ovary. Stigma, style, ovary together make a carpel or a pistil. In this hibiscus flower, it is having a brown colored tip. A brown colored tip, that is called stigma. Then a narrow tubular part, which is called as the style. The narrow tubular part is called as a style, which connects to a vase, like a flower vase, is it not? Connects to a vase-like structure called as the ovary. This ovary contains the ovules, which are the female gametes. Ovules contain the female gametes, whereas pollen grains contain the male gametes. So these two are the reproductive parts. One is the stamen and the pistil. Stamens are the male reproductive parts and pistils are the female reproductive parts. So hibiscus is having both stamen and pistils. So hibiscus flower is an example of a bisexual flower. Hibiscus, or you can, another example, mustard. An example of bisexual flower. Why bisexual? Because having both stamen as well as the pistil. Whereas papaya or papita, what is called papaya and watermelon, they are examples of unisexual flowers. Papaya, or you can give the example of watermelon. They are examples of unisexual flowers. Right? So, these are called accessories. Sepals and petals are called accessories, whereas stamens and pistils are called the reproductive parts. Right? So, this is a typical flower containing all the four parts. Sepals, that is a green colored leaf-like structures at the base of the flower. The stalk of the flower is called as pedicel. The stalk means where the flower is attached to the branch is called as the pedicel. Then the sepals, then the beautifully colored petals. In between the petals is the pistil, and attached to the pistil are the stamens. In a hibiscus, they may be free also. Right? There are different arrangements of stamens and pistils in different flowers. There may be or even groups or circles. There are different varieties of arrangements of these stamens and pistils depending on the species, depending on the flower plant, right? So stamens and pistils. Stamens are male reproductive parts and pistils are the female reproductive parts. Now, a collection of these stamens, collection of stamens is called as androecium. It's called as androecium. A collection of pistils is called as gynoecium. It's called as gynoecium. A collection of sepals is called calyx. A collection of petals is called corolla. A group of stamens is called as androecium. And a collection or a group of pistils is called gynoecium. These are the botanical terms. Calyx, a group of sepals. Corolla, a group of petals. Androecium, a group of stamens. And gynoecium, a group of pistils. All these parts are called as whorls. They are called as whorls of the flower. They are called whorls of the flower. This is about the flower. Now, in sexual reproduction of a plant, there are three stages. There are three stages. First, as I told you, pollination. As I told you, pollination. What is pollination? Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of one flower to the stigma of either the same flower or different flower. There are three stages in the sexual reproduction in plants. They are stages in the sexual reproduction of plants. Which are there? First one is pollination. Second one is called fertilization. And the third is called germination. There are three stages in sexual reproduction. First one is called pollination, and second is called fertilization. Third one is called germination. Now we have come to know about the male and the female part of the flower, that is the stamens and the pistils. So the stamens are containing pollen grains, whereas pistils are containing the ovules. Right? So the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of a flower to the stigma of the same flower or a different flower is called pollination. Transfer of pollen grains from anthers to stigma of a flower is called as pollination. Transfer of pollen from anthers to stigma. Transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma is called as pollination. Right? There are three stages in the sexual reproduction of plants. One is pollination, second is fertilization, third is germination. So first step, pollination. What is pollination? Pollination is transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of a flower to the stigma of the flower. It may be stigma of the same flower or stigma of another flower. So depending upon the transfer of pollen grains from anthers to stigma, we have two types of pollination. One is self-pollination and another is called cross-pollination. What is the difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination? In self-pollination, pollen grains are transferred from the anthers of one flower to the stigma of the same flower. Pollen grains are transferred from anthers of one flower to the stigma of the same flower. Means within the flower, pollination takes place. If the pollen grains are transferred from the anthers of one flower to the flower to stigma of another flower, then we call it as cross-pollination. If the pollen grains are transferred from anthers of one flower to the stigma of another flower, maybe in the same plant or present in a different plant, maybe in the same plant or a flower in a different plant, then we call it as cross-pollination. Sexual pollination takes place usually in bisexual flowers, whereas cross-pollination takes place in unisexual as well as bisexual. Right? Cross pollination takes place in unisexual flowers. Right? And cross pollination is always preferred because it is a transfer of pollen from one flower to another flower, or from flower in one plant to flower of another flower. So which helps in bringing changes within the plant, or what we call as variations. Variations are brought by cross pollination. So always cross pollination is preferred, because self pollination means it is having the genetic material of the same flower, so there will not be any changes, variations. You cannot expect variations if in self pollination, but variations can be expected in a this unisexual flower only if it takes place through cross pollination. So cross pollination is always preferred to self pollination, right? So pollination, self pollination and cross pollination, which is the first or fundamental step in sexual reproduction in plants. This is done by different organisms, which we call as agents of pollination, which I will tell you later. Now, after the pollination takes place, most of this transfer of pollen grains is done by the insects. You know, insects sit on the flowers to suck the nectar. So, while sucking the nectar unknowingly, without their knowledge, they transfer pollen grains from one flower to another flower. Insects keep on flying from flower to flower, is it not? Whether it is in a park, whether it is in a garden, or whether it is in an agricultural field or a cultivated land where we grow crops. So in growing of crop, that is in agriculture, pollination plays a very important role. Right? Now, what are the agents of pollination? One is the insects, second animals, third water, fourth wind. Right? Pollination done by insects, pollination is done by animals, pollination is done by water, and pollination is also done by the wind. Pollination done by insects is called entomophily. Pollination done by animals is called zoophily. Pollination done by water is called hydrophily. And pollination done by wind is called anemophily. So depending on who is the agent of pollination, pollen grains have different modifications or adaptations, what we call. Okay, depending on who are the agents of pollination, the pollen grains develop different modifications or what we call as adaptations. Right? So pollination can take place through insects in most of the cases, agricultural fields and flowers in the gardens or etc. In the forest, pollination is also brought about by the animals. The fruits of this stick to the body of the animals, and animals unknowingly transfer pollen grain from one plant to another plant. In aquatic plants, that is water plants, pollination takes place by water. This is called hydrophily. Now in trees, huge trees, pollen grains are shed into the atmosphere. They are exposed to the atmosphere. So pollen grains fall to the atmosphere and wind carries the pollen grains from one place to another place. So pollination done through the wind is called anemophily. Pollination through insects, through animals, through water, through wind. All these are called, even birds also. This is called ornithophily. Ornithophily, right? Pollination done by the birds is called ornithophily. So these are all the agents of pollination. Okay, that's enough for today. Now, the next part, that is what we call fertilization and germination, I will discuss in my next video. If you like my video, you can share and subscribe. Keep reading for your examination. Right? Thank you.